Open the podcast bay doors, Hal.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 125 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I've been a proud geek all my life, being into role-playing games, board games, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially superheroes and comics. And I want to help others join me in those pursuits, but I've found that sometimes people can get overwhelmed or feel left out because they don't already have what some consider the requisite knowledge to be considered a fan. And that's where Welcome to Geektown comes in. Here you can ask your questions without feeling like a gatekeeper is calling you out for not yet being fully versed in every aspect of your new interest. This episode's release date is the last day of July, so I'm getting in my patron shoutout just under the wire. Once again, I would like to thank my patrons: Justin Bailey, Lily Breen, Jesse Clark, Ricky Garvin, Rob Garrison, Aaron Woodward, Aaron Borst, Carla Hoffman, Lyndon Onstead, Julio Herrera, Matthew Saint, and Utuk Zul. Your support every month helps keep me going on this podcast, and I'm truly grateful. Thank you so much. Now, on to the show. One of the recurring features I've been doing is what I've been calling The Replacements, where I dive into the history of those characters that have stepped in to take up the mantle of another, usually more well-known, hero. However, with the popularity of the animated movie Into the Spider-Verse and the upcoming sequels, listener Anthony H. wanted to know more about the characters that don't necessarily take the place of the hero, but are so similar as to need a second glance to tell them apart. Fittingly, we'll start this new feature that I'm calling The Alternates with Spider-Man and a few of his extra-dimensional counterparts. I've already done a Replacements episode on Spider-Man, which discussed Ben Reilly, the Spider-Clone, also discussed some last episode, Miles Morales, the star of the Spider-Verse movies who originated in the Ultimate Universe, and Dr. Octopus, who put his mind into Peter's body and became the Superior Spider-Man. Go back to episode 98 for their history. Then, with the What If books and the Spider-Verse storyline in the comics, which inspired the movie but was not a direct adaptation, there have been literally hundreds, if not thousands, of alternate Peter Parkers, whose histories vary slightly but are essentially the same character. Instead of going through all those, we'll focus on the ones who are significantly different from the original. And since Anthony's question was inspired by the Into the Spider-Verse movie, this time we'll look at the characters from that film that originally appeared in the comics. We'll basically go in chronological order of their first appearance, and that means we begin with none other than Peter Porker, the Spectacular Spider-Ham. This anthropomorphic pig was created by Larry Hama, Tom DeFalco, and Mark Armstrong, and originally appeared in a 1983 one-shot called Marvel Tales, spelled T-A-I-L-S, as opposed to the reprint book Marvel Tales, spelled T-A-L-E-S. And other similar animal parodies were also featured in the book, including Captain Americat and Goose Rider. Spider-Ham was the star of the book, however, and a couple of years later he got his own solo title, under Marvel's kid-friendly Star Comics banner. Issues came out every month for nearly 3 years, being cancelled with issue number 17. Strangely, it wasn't until issue 15 of this series that Porker actually gets an origin story. Unlike Peter Parker, who was bitten by a radioactive spider, this universe's Peter was a spider originally, albeit an anthropomorphic one. He lived in May Porker's basement, but an accident involving an atomic-powered hairdryer that she had invented led to May biting Peter, who then transformed into the titular Spider-Ham. In the aftermath of the accident, May came to believe herself Peter's aunt, and Peter went along with the delusion. While he could no longer spin webs himself, his newfound genius, imparted by the bite, allowed him to create web shooters, similar to the original Spider-Man. Obviously, Spider-Ham has mostly been used for humor, fighting villainous Marvel parodies like Doctor Doom and The King Pig, but was one of the main players in the original Spider-Verse storyline, featuring prominently in the final battle, and also starred in the post-Spider-Verse book titled Web Warriors, as a comedic character in a more serious story, much as he was portrayed in the movie. In these comics, he looks less like a Saturday morning cartoon character and more like what an anthropomorphic pig would look like in the, real world? I'll include a picture in the show notes so you can see what I mean. Moving on from the lightest of characters, we move to the darkest, figuratively and literally. Presented only in black and white in the Spider-Verse movie, Spider-Man Noir first appeared in the book of the same name in February 2009, written by David Hine and Fabrice Sapolsky, with art by Carmine Di Giandomenico. The books are in full color, by the way. Although he didn't work on his first published appearance, co-creator credit also goes to Marko Yurdovic for designing his costume. Spider-Man Noir was originally one of 4 noir miniseries, homaging the film noir genre, most popular in the 40s and early 50s. Of all the alternates we're looking at today, he's the one that sticks closest to the original, although there's still quite a few differences, as you'll see. This Spider-Man is Peter Parker, but instead of being introduced to the world in the 1960s, this Peter was raised in the Great Depression era. His origin story takes place in the winter of 1932. Instead of a radioactive spider bite, his powers come from a more magical source, as Peter discovers a trove of stolen antiques while working for photojournalist Ben Urich at the Daily Bugle. One of those antiques is an idol to an ancient spider god, and when it breaks open, a horde of spiders comes out, one of which bites Peter. Peter passes out, and dreams of the spider god offering him the curse of power. When he wakes up, he finds he has spider powers, like sticking to walls, super strength and agility, and organic web shooters on his wrist, like the Spider-Man from the Sam Raimi movies. Having learned the lesson his late Uncle Ben taught him that, quote, if those in power can't be trusted, it's the responsibility of the people to remove them, end quote, Peter donned a costume mostly made from his uncle's World War I pilot uniform and became a crime fighter, although originally a much more brutal one than his mainstream counterpart. However, after he killed his world's version of the Vulture, his aunt decried Spider-Man as being just as bad as the criminals he fought, which caused Peter to rethink his lethal ways, and from then on he would capture villains he fought, bringing them to justice. Since his first 4-issue miniseries, the noir version of Spider-Man appeared in a second miniseries, one of only 2 noir titles to get a sequel, then showed up in the Spider-Verse crossover storyline. In the sequel to Spider-Verse, titled Spider-Geddon, Spider-Man Noir was one of many characters to end up dying. However, we learn later that he was resurrected on his own Earth, with the spider god that originally gave him his powers telling him that his service was not finished yet. After this brush with death, the noir version of Spider-Man became more glib and spoke with a much more stereotypical 30s movie dialect, which, probably not coincidentally, brought him much closer in character to the version of Spider-Man Noir seen in the Into the Spider-Verse animated movie. Last seen in a third miniseries released in 2020, this version of Peter Parker works as the most noir profession out there, a private eye, while doing his crime fighting and world saving on the side. Next up on the list is Penny Parker, aka Spider, SP//DER. Outside of the movie, she's only made a few brief appearances, starting with Edge of Spider-Verse number 5, part of a miniseries leading up to the Spider-Verse crossover, in a story written by Gerard Way, best known as the lead singer of My Chemical Romance, but also a longtime comic book fan and writer, with art by Jake Wyatt. Both the comic book and movie version have similar origins, with a psychic connection between Penny and a sentient spider allowing the two to control a mech. The big difference between the movie and comic book versions is one of tone. In the movie, Penny and her companions are presented in a more kid-friendly version of the anime style, while her comic book counterpart looks like she would belong much more in the world of Akira rather than Sailor Moon. Our final alternate is the character currently known as Ghost Spider, but originally called Spider-Woman or simply Spider-Gwen. Before we get too deep into her history, we should briefly take a glance at the Earth-616 version of Gwen Stacy. Although Peter Parker had a number of potential romantic partners in his early years, Gwen Stacy was his first long-term girlfriend, with their first date chronicled in Amazing Spider-Man number 53, and their relationship mostly continuing from there until her tragic demise in Amazing Spider-Man number 121. In a moment that has been referenced multiple times in the various Spider-Man films, Gwen fell to her death after the Green Goblin threw her off the top of the George Washington Bridge, or the Brooklyn Bridge, depending on whether you go by the text of the story or the artwork, respectively. This storyline is one of Spider-Man's defining moments, and has haunted him to this day. Gwen has come back a couple of times as a clone, although whether or not it was a true clone of Gwen or merely someone brainwashed into thinking they were Gwen was retconned back and forth a couple of times. But even those resurrections didn't stick, and Gwen of the 616 universe has remained deceased. However, in an alternate universe, it was Gwen herself that was bitten by the radioactive spider and gained superpowers as a result. She took on the name Spider-Woman on that world, and after a brief flirtation with using her powers for more selfish pursuits, quickly took on the role of crime fighter. She struggled to maintain a balance between her vigilantism and her life as a high school student and social life, which mostly related to her role as the drummer in The Mary Janes, a band started by her and her best friend Mary Jane Watson. Although Gwen in this world never dated Peter Parker, she was friends with him, and so she suffered her own tragedy when Peter, desperate to be like his idol Spider-Woman, experimented on himself and turned into a lizard-like creature and crashed the school's prom. Peter and Gwen fought, and Peter died shortly after reverting back to his human form. When you watch the Spider-Verse movie and Gwen relates this story, she doesn't mention his transformation, but if you look closely, you can see the fading scales on his skin. This event prompted Gwen to devote even more of her time to helping people as Spider-Woman, but also led to her alter ego being wanted by the police, as the connection between Peter Parker and the Lizard was never discovered, leading the authorities to believe Gwen responsible for the death of the young high schooler. Of all the alternates discussed in this episode, Gwen has had the most panel time dedicated to her. She first appeared in Edge of Spider-Verse number 2 in September 2014, and in the less than 10 years since then, has had 3 ongoing titles and appeared in multiple spider-related crossovers. She briefly lost her powers, but she got similar powers when she bonded with a venom-like symbiote on her world. While the symbiote originally fed off and amplified her darkest urges, the two have reached a balance that allows Gwen to be the hero she was always destined to be. The other big story event in Gwen's life was the reveal of her secret identity. She originally kept it from everyone, including her father, but she slowly let in her closest friends and family into her double life, and eventually went public with her superhero identity in order to be held accountable for the things she had done while under the influence of the more malevolent aspects of the symbiote. She went to jail for a year, but has come out all the stronger for it, being beloved by most of the citizens of her world. As a result of her various adventures, Gwen also has access to the multiverse, using a WebWatch device to travel between worlds, and was spending much of her time recently in the main Marvel Universe as a student at Empire State University, in order to have a place she could go where her identity wasn't generally known. As of this recording, Gwen is meeting with more alternate versions of herself in a story called Into the Gwenverse, which includes a Gwen Thor, Gwen Wolverine, Gwen Captain America, and others. There's also a Gwen-inspired character out there called Gwenpool, but while her appearance is somewhat similar to Gwen Stacy and was first created as a cover piece for a Gwen-related event, she's not actually an alternate version of Gwen Stacy and has become a separate character in her own right. For those who like these sort of details, the Earths that each of the alternate spiders belong to are the following. Peter Porker is from Earth 8311, the Noir universe is 90214, Penny Parker originates from Earth 14512, and Spider-Gwen comes from Earth 65. And be sure to check out episode 111 of Welcome to Geektown if you want some history of where that numbering system started, both in-universe and behind the scenes. Now, there is one more Spider-Man that appears in the first Spider-Verse movie, and that is Spider-Man 2099. However, he only makes a brief cameo at the end, and this episode would probably go on much longer than a standard Welcome to Geektown would if I dive into his history, as it's fairly extensive. So I'll save him and others, like the Spider-Man of India, Spider-Punk, and Spiders-Man, for future episodes. If there's particular others you want me to cover, or have other questions you'd like answered in a future episode of Welcome to Geektown, let me know. I'm always happy to receive messages from my listeners. You can send any and all of those, or any other feedback via email to welcometogeektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you'd prefer to remain anonymous. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcome to Geektown or Twitter @GeektownPodcast. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, come join the Patreon at patreon.com/welcome to Geektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show so we can all tell them, Welcome to Geektown, population, us. Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips of the copyrighted material, their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.